Welcome to Discast here, a podcast for parents and teachers about the best way to support kids living with learning difficulties. My name's Michael Shanahan.
I think I'm Bill Hansberry.
And today we are joined by Kirrilie Smout. And we're going to be interviewing Kirrilie about what today, Bill?
Well, we're going to be talking to Kirrilie probably about one of the hardest aspects of working with, whether you teach or you intervene with students with specific learning difficulties, and it's the emotional side of it. I mean, Michael, we've talked about this in bits and bobs, haven't we?
Yep.
Before, but we're really interested in Kirrilie's insights on some of this because this is Kirrilie's wheelhouse.
Yeah. But before we start and introduce Kirrilie, we'd like to acknowledge that we're casting to you today from the traditional lands of the Kaurna people.
And we'd like to pay our respects to elders emerging past and present, and also acknowledge that we are on Kaurna land. It always has been and always will be Kaurna land, Michael.
Thank you, Bill. Bill, would you like to introduce Kirrilie?
It is my absolute pleasure. Now, I'm about to have a fanboy moment here, Kirrilie.
Bill.
Kirrilie is... Kirrilie, we've known each other for a long time.
We have.
Kirrilie runs a thriving psychology business in Adelaide. Kirrilie, your work has always been something I go to. I've got When Life Sucks for Kids in front of me when I'm working with kids. Always a very sensible take on things, Kirrilie. And when I said to Michael, guess what, we might be able to get Kirrilie in. Michael knew of you too and was quite pumped.
Yeah.
So we've finally got here, Kirrilie. Now, after that, Kirrilie, where I've probably, praised you, made you go red, embarrassed you. Tell us a bit about your work, Kirrilie.
Oh, well, thank you. That's a lovely introduction. So
it was rambling, wasn't it? Yeah.
Oh, apparently it can be edited out. So I'm here. Thank you for having me. I was very excited myself when you rang, having listened to several episodes, as you know, and been extremely impressed. So I'm very pleased to be here. But a little bit about me, I am assuming that's what you want me to say.
Please.
Okay. So I'm a clinical child psychologist, been working with children and families for about 27 years now. So have had the privilege of many thousands of conversations with kids with lots of different life challenges, including those kids who are living with learning difficulties and all kinds of challenges at school and outside of school. So I work with kids from about 4 to 18 and have a group of wonderful child psychologists who also do the same work. Is that enough information?
I think it's a beautiful summary.
Yeah.
All right.
Kirrilie, I'm holding open, like I mentioned before, When Life Sucks for Kids. And I know you also did When Life Sucks for Teens, didn't you?
Yes.
Like I mentioned before, you can see that I've heavily bookmarked, dog-eared and even paperclip pages because I do work with some of my students. I just read them bits and pieces. Now, the bit that caught my eye or caught our eye for this chapter, Kirrilie, was the part of the book titled I'm Not Very Smart. Now, I guess our kids, when I say our kids, the students Michael and I work with, they rock up feeling just that.
Yep.
And like we've talked about in other Discast here episodes, it's kind of our job to help our students see the difficulties they experience as a difficulty, usually inside a sea of strengths. And Kirrilie, I know you talked about that in your calm and confident statements. I can see you trying to help young people localise or isolate those difficulties that can cause them being behind at school, finding schoolwork harder than others. Was that your intention when you wrote that?
I reckon I had a few key kids in my head when I wrote that chapter, really, because I find the area heartbreaking at times, to be honest. And I think that you would see this all the time, that we have families who come to see us who are devastated, distressed and broken because of this feeling like, I can't do this. I can't read. I can't match up to my peers. What's going to happen to me? And so I'd love to talk today about what we can do, but I think it would be a good place to start, if that's okay, to talk about the reality of this for lots of families.
Yeah, absolutely.
We can reflect on this just anecdotally, of course, but the research tells us that what we're seeing when we're seeing young people is true across Australia and internationally. So the research does tell us that children who have learning difficulties are more likely than kids who don't to experience emotional health problems. So they're more likely to experience what psychologists would call internalising and externalising problems. So the internalising problems, they're more likely to feel worried, stressed, they're more likely to feel sad, to feel hopeless about themselves than kids who don't. And then the externalising difficulties are those difficulties where they, we might say, act out, I suppose, but they're more likely to get frustrated and not want to follow instructions and not feel cooperative and not feel like, perhaps not make good decisions in their behaviours with peers or adults around them. So it's not just the occasional kid with a learning difficulty that has this. A lot of kids who have learning difficulties or dyslexia are going to act in these ways and feel like this. The other thing I want to say too, though, is that it's not just the kids who are experiencing this, it's their parents as well.
Yeah.
So research will tell us that parents of kids with learning difficulties are also more likely to feel really distressed and despairing about what's happening to their kids. What have I done? What's going to happen in their future? Is it my fault? And it's not something that is easily talked about either. So a lot of this distress that we're seeing kids and family have, they're kind of keeping it in their heads because there's a certain level of shame in talking about it.
Yeah.
So is that your experiences when you've
Yeah,
got kids?
when I'm hearing you speak, straight away part of me is saying, but not everyone.
Right.
Because I'm thinking, I would hate to give the impression that a diagnosis of a specific learning difficulty means there's going to be mental health or emotional problems, because I do see kids that are coping really well and parents that are coping really well.
Absolutely.
So it's not like a sentence.
No,
it's not like
it's not a
this.
definite,
It's not
It's a
like this
probability.
equals this.
Yeah.
It's more probable, but it's not inevitable.
Absolutely.
And it would be interesting to maybe tease that apart down the track as to, are there some predispositions that make it more difficult for some rather than others?
Yes, and I'm very happy to talk about that because there's actually been some research, some great research in Western Australia about this, actually looking at what are the factors that make it more likely for kids with learning difficulties to experience these problems or less. So thank you for bringing that point up, Michael, because I do want people to not feel as though there's an inevitability about this, because there isn't. But I also want there to be some normalisation for people for whom it happens.
Yes.
Because I think that we so often talk about the educational challenges and the learning challenges, but really often what is underneath that that's even more distressing is the emotional stuff. And that kind of gets put to the back seat in some ways because we're so focused on trying to remediate and do something about it that we forget to acknowledge the emotional pain that's there.
Yeah, exactly. It is so tricky, isn't it? So as someone living with a learning difficulty myself and parenting kids who live with learning difficulties, I kind of feel like I was in a good position to set my kids up to not struggle. But I can't say that I was 100% successful. So
you weren't a perfect parent,
no,
Michael. Is that what you're saying?
Which is so disappointing for me.
Jeez.
And see, then the parental guilt comes in, which is really difficult.
Yeah.
And so what does that research tell us? Like, what are the sort of circumstances? How do we set them up best to succeed?
Yeah. So there are a range of different things that we can point to, and they're not going to be the same for all kids. But one of the important factors that seems to mediate this or influence this is how young people think about their learning difficulties and how they think about that and fitting into their self-concept. This, of course, is common sense, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of psychological research is common sense. I'm going to say it, but sometimes it's good to put the numbers on it. But when we have young people who feel like their learning difficulties are a part of who they are rather than the totality of who they are, when they feel as though there are a range of strengths that they have, then that self-concept that's still intact protects them from a whole lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yep.
I find the whole area of neurodiversity that's come through in the last decade or so from the ASD world and the ADHD world really interesting and really helpful when we're thinking about learning difficulties as well. Is that something, have you talked much about that on this podcast? Should we throw that ball into the air there?
We actually should, because Kirrilie, as you talked about that research, again, I was thinking straight back to Sally Shaywitz, who is one of the leaders in our field, Dr. Sally Shaywitz from Yale Centre for Dyslexia and Creativity, who said students who do see something like dyslexia or another specific learning difficulty as a specific difficulty within a sea of strengths are more likely to do better. But look, I've seen this come up a number of times. Dyslexia is not me, or dysgraphia or dyscalculia is not me. It's part of my setup, but it's only a bit.
Yes.
Yeah, but at school, it looks big.
Yes,
Yeah.
because there's so much focus on that. But I think what we're moving towards is not even just the strengths and deficits model. It's actually another piece to that, which is that my deficits are only deficits in certain situations
that's right.
and only when the world is set up a certain way.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
So if we look at a completely different world or a different career path or a different kind of societal setup, the things that we think are deficits may actually turn out to be the things that save people and make the world an awesome place.
Absolutely.
And so we're trying to talk more now about differences and uniqueness, and that all differences bring something to the world. Now, I think that this can be a little Pollyanna-like, right?
Yeah,
so we have to have some balance here because the reality for a kid who can't read, it's hard to see that as, well, in some situations, not being able to read is going to be amazing. It's kind of a bit of a stretch, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's some middle ground, like all things, if we can try and find the common middle, it's pretty boring, but it can be a good way of looking at things. But I think if we can kind of pull into looking at not just what are this child's strengths, but the things that are a deficit for them in some situations, maybe that means if they're not reading, are they actually looking at someone and communicating?
Yeah.
If they're not actually writing well, are they instead, running around and bringing some kind of other awesome aspect to the world? So definitely the way kids see themselves will influence whether their learning difficulties lead to more mental health problems. But there are some other moderators too, which we can look at in a minute if you want.
Yes, please. So, sorry, keep going,
And
Michael.
it's how you go about letting them know what those strengths are. Is that what you meant by that Pollyanna moment? You don't want to just make it like, so it sounds like you're just saying it. You know what I mean? The kid has to actually believe they have that strength as well.
They have to believe it.
You can't just say, hey, you're really good at this, and they're sitting there thinking, no, I'm not.
Yes,
you're just
exactly. Kids are so smart. They're like, oh, well, I'm just going to completely ignore that adult who's obviously off with the fairies because, they can't see this, then I'm not going to listen to them about anything, So we have to be credible and authentic. But we can bring in our perspective and help kids to broaden the way they see themselves.
Yeah. There's certainly some mental flexibility required here, but I couldn't agree more. This stuff of dyslexia being my superpower or being my gift, and many people have used that terminology over the years, and I think the most important audience who you'd want to believe that are the kids, and they don't. That's the Pollyanna-ish stuff, I think. Yeah.
Well, some of them do. I think some of them do, but whether that's useful or not, I'm not sure.
I suppose that's an individual by individual thing again, isn't it?
Yeah, like, do we say a blanket? I mean, don't get me wrong.
No.
I don't think that's necessarily a good approach, but if it works for someone, could it be harmful for them to be thinking dyslexia is my superpower? What do you think? Is there harm in that?
I think it does depend on the child and the situation, and what they're applying it to. So, if dyslexia is my superpower, then means, I'm not going to try at all anymore to do some things that are actually really important for my life, then no, it's not helpful at all.
Yeah.
But if it means that I'm going to redirect my attention away from just thinking about myself as a failure, and maybe still keep on working on things that are important, then maybe fantastic. And maybe even that then frees them to actually do the work that's required.
It's tricky, isn't it?
Michael, I really do appreciate how you pick up the nuances, because there are some kids, I'm sure, for whom that is really helpful. Now, I'm sitting across the table from an adult with dyslexia, and mate, you have got superpowers. Absolutely. You have such a broad set of incredible abilities. Now, whether that's partly due to your dyslexia or not, I don't know. But
yeah, see, I personally, I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm offended, but I kind of think like, this is me.
Yeah.
I don't separate myself out to say, well, this is the dyslexic bit of me and this is this bit of me. I don't even think of dyslexia. You know what I mean? They're not. It's not like a thing.
Yeah.
And this is where I have a little bit of trouble with the dyslexia as my superpower, because to me it's a little bit like I say to you, don't think of a pink elephant, and straight away you got to think of a pink elephant.
Yeah.
It's kind of putting the focus, I think, not on the person. You know how we were saying before about it being about that whole person and, I'm a person with strengths and diversity and so on.
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels a little bit like I'm focusing too much on what clearly is a weakness and trying to somehow flip it. It doesn't mesh with me. It's not to say it won't mesh with other people, but that doesn't mesh with me. I'd rather say you are totally awesome artist.
Yeah.
Like you are amazing. But, if you want to be an artist, somewhere along the way, you got to learn to read, because it's going to be a big part of what you're doing. So let's get in there and do it.
That's
right. Let's learn, but don't forget that you're an amazing artist, or you're an amazing sports person, or you're amazing at this or amazing at that. I think they become your lifelines to think, I don't know, just speaking personally now, at the times when you're feeling your worst, to be able to look back and see success in something.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what it is. Like at school, I was a runner. Like I was really good at running and athletics. I think my school life would have been very different if I didn't have something that I was really good at.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's right. Yeah.
So some little thread of, here's some proof, and it's not someone else saying it to me. It's me knowing in my heart, hey, I actually was really good at that, or I am really good at these couple of things. So
And
I don't know
maybe-
if telling people works.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
No. We're talking about this conceptually. In terms of how we communicate it with kids is a whole nother thing. But maybe the the strengths that people have, those doors have been opened because of the challenges.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
so that's why I think this diversity and difference model can be helpful rather than just the strengths and challenges, because they're related maybe.
Yeah.
And so instead of seeing it as, well, I'm good at running, but, I'm really bad at reading, we could see them as, this is me with all my differences, and maybe there's some okay bits about me being bad at reading, because it means that I'm also got energy and mental space to be good at running.
Or I learned to put my all into those bits that I find not easy, or those natural talents to develop. I can understand how it would be good to be able to go, right, I feel really awful about this part of my performance, but by heck, I'm going to put everything into this other bit.
Yeah. Or to know that you can get success.
That's right.
In something. If you really try hard, because being good at running is not an easy thing either.
No.
You have got to train, you've got to work, it's hard work, but you succeed.
Yeah.
So I think knowing that you can do the hard yards and get success in something. It doesn't have to be reading, it can be drawing, it can be music, and it can be anything. So what happens with those kids who don't have those opportunities? You know, what is we've kind of gone around a big conversation here, but what we were talking about was setting kids up for success.
Yes.
And so the kids who don't have that mindset are probably the kids that end up interacting with you. You know, you don't see the kids who are flying through.
No, sadly.
Doing really well.
Not as often unless we chase them. Look, so as well as self-concept, there are some other things that moderate how well kids with dyslexia do. So one of them is peer support and peer connection. So one of the things that we want to do as adults who are caring for these kids is to do everything we can to help them with social skills and social opportunities. Now, this, of course, is way easier said than done.
Yeah.
Right? There'll be heaps of families that will listen to that and go, oh, well, you know, it's not like we don't work our guts out at this as well, and it's not easy. But I think continuing to have a focus on that all of the time makes such a difference to those kids who do okay and those who don't.
Yeah.
So that's looking at, you know, is there some extracurricular options for them? You know, are there play dates or for secondary kids, you know, are there places for them to hang out? Do they have the ability to invite people over or start conversation or make jokes? Can they resolve conflict at a developmentally appropriate level? Not expecting 6-year-olds to be great at that, but, you know, we want them to have some skills of sorry saying and inquiring, and you're the expert on this, Bill, so you know this stuff.
But we all try.
We want like looking at what are those social skills and those conflict resolution skills and connection, and just kind of keeping on working at that will make a huge difference for those kids.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
And why does that make a difference?
I think it is because it impacts on it impacts on self-concept.
Yeah.
You know, I'm someone with friends.
Yeah.
We also know more broadly, adult mental health is the same. You have connection with people. Those parts of the brain around conversation and altruistic kind of pro-social helping behaviour are very closely linked to the parts of the brain that are responsible for positive mood. You know, we're designed to live in community as human beings. We feel better when we're living in community.
That's right.
So kids are the same.
Warm-blooded, hairy mammals.
Yeah. So could this be, I mean, one of the issues living with a learning difficulty is that you end up spending more time doing homework.
Right.
You know, it's just for the same amount of work, it probably takes you 2-3 times as long. And so you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And speaking as a parent as well, where you think, okay, well, to keep up, I got to do hours of homework.
Yeah.
So I might have to make a choice here. Do I have a social life or do I do things outside of school and inevitably fall behind?
Yeah.
And now that causes more anxiety and more stress.
Yes.
So there's a difficult situation there, isn't there?
It's so
and this is really real. You know,
decision.
This is a real life situation that's happening probably for most people.
Absolutely. On a daily basis. What do you choose? Like, when do you shut the books and, you know, go and game with your friends online? So it is a really hard decision. One of the things, and I don't have any formulas to solving it, but one of the things I do talk with families about is just keeping in mind that mood impacts learning so
fundamentally.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, you know, for all of us, if we, you know, artificially lower our mood, psychologists are really great at this in the lab. You know, they get people to kind of do some tasks and then they make them fail artificially repeatedly and tell them, you know, get them to reflect on all of their past failings.
Sounds like a hoot.
Yeah. Sign me up.
Wouldn't be my first choice of a job, but some people do it. So, you know, if we all have our mood reduced and then we're given a maths test or a reading test, all of us will do significantly worse.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when we're thinking about the importance of mood for children, we want them to, you know, they have to sit and kind of do this extra work. But sometimes 15 minutes on elevating mood with some time with friends, you'll get through the work a little bit faster.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And you know, where would that sit on the spectrum of forcing a kid to do their work? Because there's got to come a point, you know, there comes a point as a parent and as a teacher where you got to make a judgment call and think, is this kid just trying to get out of doing this work because, they're lazy or they're just trying to get out of it?
Yeah.
And so you need to give them a little bit of a push and give them a little bit of extra kind of adrenaline to get them moving, get them over that hump. How do you draw the line there where you say, but, at other times giving them that extra push might actually put them over the limit. Yeah. And so now they can't actually do the work because they're too anxious because their parents just told them off or the teachers told them off and everything's gone out the window. That's a delicate balance, isn't it?
And it's a question I get all of the time. Is child X doing or saying Y because they are genuinely distressed, or is it that there's some kind of, extra motivation there that's going on? And my answer to that is you will never know. And my second answer to that is behaviour is always multiply determined, right? So is it 10% I'm feeling sad right now, or 90% and 90% I actually just want to go and play my game, or for the other way round? There's always going to be both components in there. So you're going to get your brain tied up in knots if you're trying to figure out which is it, because it's never going to be that simple.
Multiply determined.
So in which case we have to make a decision as best we can, really hard to know, but as best we can on what we think is best for the child, rather than trying to figure out why they're doing something.
Or are they trying to deceive me? Are they not? It's a slippery slope,
you're on a hiding
isn't
to
it?
nothing to figure that out, because the kid probably doesn't even know half the time. So, if we've decided as parents, look, what is really good for Johnny is to do, X amount of minutes here and Y amount of minutes here, then I think you just kind of have to try and go with that. Of course, there's always going to be exceptions, and there are nights you're going to go, we need to give up here. But you kind of try and go with what you think is right according to your values and the needs of the kids, rather than what they're saying on any one night.
This makes me think, so I've got a young student who's just started. And like a lot of youngsters that have just started, they're getting into the routine of doing their phonology cards, their reading card pack at home, and their concept card pack. And we know it's so important to help the parent and the child set good habits early. Because, Michael, you and I know the consequences of a kid who's hit and miss on that revision when the pack's an inch thick and it's taking them 7-8 minutes to get through it at home. So I'm saying to the mum, it's really good that we set this expectation early and we set the routines around it early and expect pushback. But something I also said was, you're going to get pushback, but you also need to be really predictable with the child around you expecting it being done. So really what I'm saying is don't back off. But there are going to be times, here's the big X in the equation, there are going to be times when, like you said, the parent just goes, tonight this is a battle that is just a bridge too far.
I think you have to look at patterns over sort of weeks and months rather than kind of any one day. So if you're making the exception every second day or every third day, then that's probably not going to be helpful. If you've determined what's helpful to do is this, and you're not doing it 2 out of 3 times, clearly that's not going to work. But I think we've got to build in some flexibility too, don't you? Families just have lives that are... And then there's expecting the expectations, which is absolutely essential. We know that permissive parenting styles, for example, parents who find it really hard, they're really warm and encouraging, but they find it really hard to have expectations and follow through on expectations. Those kids end up doing worse. So we know we can't do that. We also know, however, that the opposite type of parenting, where we're expecting kids to do what they're told, be little soldiers, no warmth, that's even worse. So we have to kind of find this kind of middle ground where we are being empathic with limits around the things that we want kids with learning difficulties to do. So the empathy piece is just so powerful, and it's one that doesn't come easily to us as adults a lot of the time when we're dealing with kids, because we have in our mindset this kind of teaching, taking charge. We feel anxious if we're not doing that stuff. But the actual sitting down and going, gee, this is hard for you, isn't it? You know, I can see you're feeling really sad about this or really worried about this. There's a study I wanted to tell you about actually, which I think is really interesting. This is in the area of medical research where kids had to have quite painful medical procedures, and the experimenters randomly allocated the parents into a high empathy group or a high distract group. So the high distract group were told to get their kids thinking about anything else while this procedure was going on and distract them and get their mind off the pain that they were experiencing. And the high empathy group were taught to provide lots of validating empathic statements to these parents. And what they did is they looked at pain levels of the kids and how much pain medication they asked for and how much pain that they expressed. And they found that parents who did the high empathy validation levels had kids who had significantly lower reported pain and lower reported pain medication. So one of the things we think we have to do as parents is to get our kids stop thinking about all the hard stuff that's going on in their life and think about all the positive stuff and think about other things and just kind of not think about it, right? But actually, one of the most powerful things we can do is to say to a kid with learning difficulties, I'm sorry that this is tough for you. That doesn't mean we don't expect them to do their cards.
Yeah. Oh, gee, I could take a leaf out of that one. Yeah.
It's a real partnership, isn't it? I mean, it sounds to me like you're describing a partnership. Like parent and child, we're in this together. And I know how hard this is.
Yeah.
But I'm here with you.
Yeah.
We still got to do it. Let's do it together. I'm going to give you the support you need.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this doesn't mean we're not going to do it.
No.
Because we're losing it then, aren't we? Then we're losing the battle.
Of course.
Yeah. Michael, do you remember, because you were trained by Alison Playford, weren't you, when you did level 1?
Partially.
So Alison, who is the Playford in Playberry, said something which stuck with me. And it was what to say in a moment when that student turns up to see us and they are just not wanting to do it. They've come in and the weight of the world's on their shoulders, and we've got this reluctant, resistant kid. And she would look at them and go, "It's not fair, is it?" And the student would kind of, "What do you mean?" "It's not fair that you have to come here. It's not fair that you have to make another excuse as to why you're leaving the classroom to be here. Say it. It's not fair." And the student would sheepishly go, "It's not fair." And Alison would say, "No, say it with meaning. It's not fair. You're damn right it's not fair. This is a really unfair situation for you and you have to do it harder than everyone. But this is just the cards we've been dealt.
Yeah.
I suppose we should just get on with it, shouldn't we?"
Beautiful.
Aren't they just beautiful words? And I've used that with so many kids. I say to kids, do you know what? You are allowed to throw yourself a pity party every now and then because this is hard.
Yeah.
Yep.
And you come here and we ask you to do stuff which feels hard and hurts.
The hardest.
Yeah.
You know, I have kids who say it physically hurts them to be trying to work out maths problems. You know, like they actually have pain in their head when they look at that and go, "Oh, this is too hard."
Yeah.
Then I know, hey, I'm pushing him a bit too hard here. But I'm thinking, are there some telltales we as parents or teachers could look for? So we're all going to find ourselves in those situations where a kid doesn't want to do something and, you know, we think they should do it. Are there some telltales in a kid's behaviour or how they're going which might be a flag to say, this is not normal struggling here. This is someone who perhaps is starting to develop an anxiety or depression or, you know, it's gone beyond just your standard level of anxiety or depression or resistance. Like, are there some telltales we should be looking for that say, oh, hold on, maybe we should go and see someone like you or get some extra support?
Yeah.
Or at very least, now's the time to make that exception around my expectations.
Yeah.
You know?
Look, I think one of the things that we should have our eye on is impact. So, in other words, it's no one sign or behaviour that is a huge flag necessarily.
Or one incident.
Or one
episode.
incident, yeah. It's the impact on functioning. So, you know, if you have a young person who gets pretty upset about things, but is still, okay to go to school and still doing some stuff and still, able to have a laugh and talk about other things, then even though they're struggling, it's not having this massive impact on their daily functioning.
Yep.
Whereas if you have a child who is just now not able to do anything that's important to them or anything that you think is important as a family, then that's when you start thinking about, do we need to try and do something more? Having said that, psychologists don't have any magic wands.
Yeah.
And a lot of what psychologists will do will be things that you've tried already. And I think it's important to be realistic about that. You're the expert still on your family. So, take what a psychologist might say and try and apply it in ways that make sense to you.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we have to talk about, I suppose the elephant in the room, is just access to psychologists.
Yeah.
So I don't want families at home going, well, I think my child really needs help. I'm going to go and make an appointment next week and get help. Because unfortunately, we just do not have the services in Australia that we need.
Yeah. It's very difficult to see someone.
Yeah.
I think sometimes as a psychologist, I think I agree with what you're saying about, the not having the magic wand or saying things, but I think it's different when it comes from someone who's not a parent.
Yeah.
And I find that even as a tutor, I kind of do have a bit of a magic wand.
Okay.
Where
I'd like to borrow that.
Yeah, where if I say something, definitely a kid would take more notice of it than if a parent had said it.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean? And sometimes I find myself in the argument settling position, where the parent and kid have been arguing and they come in and they say, well, let's ask Michael. And for some reason, if I say, whatever I say kind of wins the argument. And that's not because I'm anything special. It's just because I think we put that status onto people in, expert positions.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an advantage there, if you do go and see a psychologist, it is another little, it's an external influence on a kid.
Sure. And I'm having some slight regret going on. I just kind of diss all of our professions. Sorry, psychologists are out listening there. You do good work.
Of course.
But yeah, there is that objectivity and also the enabling discussion. You get stuff out of your head, you understand it more. And that's true for children and families too.
Yeah.
So having that third party can be really helpful. I suppose the reason for me to say those things is I hate to set up this idea of my child is struggling, therefore I have nothing I can offer or nothing I can bring to the table. I need to go and get an external person to help.
Yeah, that's what I picked up from
and
it.
it's actually not really true.
Yeah.
But sometimes you definitely can benefit from support. We all can.
Yeah.
You don't have to wait for that function problem before you go and get support. If you can find support early and access it, great, get it.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more. So, Kirrilie, one thing I really picked up from your chapter that we referred to earlier was the teaching young people that when you have to work hard on something, it actually makes your brain stronger. And I think, no, I don't think, I know that's true, whether you do or don't have a specific learning difficulty. When students struggle to, say, decode a word, something that I've said in the past is, well, that your brain wants to do everything, but that almost hurts to do that. But when it feels like that's when the brain is laying down new connections, and the brain doesn't really like doing that. And I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but I'd love you to expand on this idea, Kirrilie, of hard work makes your brain stronger.
Yeah. So there's a YouTube video I sometimes use, which I hope is still on YouTube. It's a very old video, but someone has, I'm assuming it's a neuroscientist, has captured a brain cell or two brain cells joining connections together. So it's this kind of magnified by a million times. I don't know, I'm not a neuroscientist, but you can actually see this kind of axon and dendrite kind of joining together. And so I love that video. So I show that to kids because I want them to know that all this effort that they're expending has a kind of physical correlate. Like it's not just kind of going out into the ether somewhere. They're actually shaping and changing their brains. And so that idea that when I'm working hard and concentrating, I'm doing something useful and there's a physical outworking of that, I think can help children and adolescents when they feel like there's no point to what they're doing. So, I think, and it also brings in that element of hope. So hope is so essential for good mental health, isn't it? Like, if you feel like you've got no chance of anything changing in your future, you give up. So one of the things we want to do is talk about how change is possible. We don't know what it might look like, and that doesn't mean we don't balance the acceptance as well, but we want young people to understand that the only thing we know about what's around the corner is that we don't know what's around the corner.
Right.
So that means when we have that idea, it's always going to be like this. Right? Nothing's going to change. It's going to be bad. It's going to be bad, bad, bad as far as the eye can see. You don't know that because it's around the corner.
That's so true. There's a real fatalism sometimes that I think can be easy to fall into when you're helping a young person be realistic's not the word, understanding of the impact of a specific learning difficulty on them. Yes, this is hard because, but the other side of that is we know this style of teaching that we're doing makes a difference, but by heck, it's hard work. And now we kind of dip our toe into attribution theory about when our kids do have a gain. Well, number one, do they see the gains we do? When you're inside it, you often don't. But when you do notice there's been a gain, we know our kids with specific learning difficulties or that population are more likely to attribute that gain to luck than they are to making the connection between the gain and their hard work.
Right.
And why do I say that? Because we say that because we have to help them understand that slog will make those little, that axon and dendrite connect. You can't see it, but the pain is having a structural impact, I guess. But it takes time.
Yes. It's the long game.
It is.
And that pain is changing your brain as well.
Yes.
Just like the hard work changes your brain, the pain changes your brain. And I think, I see a lot of kids get to the position where I think it's protective thinking for them to say something good's not going to happen. They build up an expectation that something bad is going to happen. So when it does happen, they're not so thrown by it. You know what I mean? They build a negative view to protect themselves from disappointment and from difficulty. So when something is difficult or they don't understand it, it's not another blow to their self-confidence because they expected this anyway. It's kind of taking a bit of control, isn't it, of a situation you're out of control in.
Well, one of the things we taught youngsters in What's the Buzz was the best way to deal with potential disappointment is prepare your brain for potential disappointment. I could be disappointed by this. It could happen. But, oh, crikey, what a rabbit hole.
Well, there's always balance. We can't go one way and say, we want kids to kind of have the lowest possible expectations. But we also don't want them to go, well, if you just do these cards in about, 3 weeks' time, you're going to be cured. And so we have to find that kind of middle ground. But it will depend on which way a child is kind of leaning as to where we might want to encourage them, I suppose.
That's right.
But I find most kids are more likely to be struggling with lack of hope than they are overestimating what will change. And also true for parents. So can we take a moment just to talk about that parent mental health stuff too?
Please.
Because there's so much pain. I think parents struggle more often with children with learning difficulties in terms of their emotional health than the kids do at times.
Fair.
Because we see this idea of what we imagined and we see that it kind of isn't working out how we want. And then there's, as you mentioned before, guilt, Michael, the parental guilt. Like, is it my fault? Have I not done enough? Someone said, did you reach your child at home or something equally ridiculous?
Constantly
lots of mums I know go back to the pregnancy, like, did I have that glass of wine? What was it? So there's that guilt, that responsibility, that sadness, that worry about your child's future. So I think making sure that parents know that it's okay for them to seek support themselves and to talk about that. I mean, they are dealing in the weeds with this kind of after school work all of the time, dealing with their child's distress. I mean, the child is more likely to say to mum or dad, I can't do it, I hate myself, I don't want to live anymore, than they are to say that to anybody else.
Yeah.
So they're dealing with that all of the time. So I really want to encourage parents to say, you are doing a hard job. And sure, it's part of being a parent, but it is hard work. So support yourself, fit your oxygen mask first if you need to. And then I want to bring in that little element of hope for them too, though.
Yeah.
Because just like we talked about, we don't know what's going to happen. Our predictions as parents where we go, this is going to be bad, this is going to be disaster.
Yeah, catastrophizing.
We need to remember, pull it back a little bit.
Yeah.
We don't know. And that's where all the beautiful examples, and I know they're kind of oversighted, but the people with dyslexia and learning disorders that have done brilliantly, we need to kind of have those kind of shining.
We do, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally am not so enamored with that idea of the shining light of people living with dyslexia.
Can set you up.
Yeah, because I kind of think, I kind of wonder, if you overdo it, of course, there's always degrees, but I wonder if you overdo that it sets up an unrealistic expectation now that, now I've got dyslexia, I've got a bigger, unless I become a world champion at something or some famous actor or something, I'm actually worthless.
Yes.
Yeah.
You can live just an ordinary life.
Yes.
That's right.
And that's a success.
Yeah, it is. Remember Annette Brock, the educational psychologist who used to run teaching students with dyslexia, would say, we've got to be careful about that. There's a hidden superpower waiting somewhere with a specific learning difficulty. Because she said, I've assessed plenty of completely ordinary dyslexic kids.
Absolutely.
So,
And they're just going to live a life.
Yeah.
Like we all do.
That's
and
right.
You don't have to be a star. You don't have to be a famous person to be successful.
No.
Yeah.
So it's overused.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And is not always appropriate. But there are times, I think, where you just need to see a completely different prediction.
Yes.
Possible future
Yeah,
than the one you're imagining.
That's
Because
right.
you're overwhelmed with the negative.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you need some light at the end of the tunnel, don't you?
Because I've spoken to lots of dyslexic adults who've said, I stood there as the teacher said to my mum, well, he or she will make a good tradie.
Yeah.
Or the world needs X profession, and in that moment determined a future.
Yeah.
With good intention, not to cause harm, but you see that's the other side of this. That's the dark side of this, isn't it? Which never meant to be dark, but yeah.
So it's the range of options that are available rather than just the superstar, I'm going to be Richard Branson ones.
That's right.
Or I'm going to be just one other thing. We need to talk to parents about the fact that their kids have a whole range of different things they could be.
That's right.
And they'll be okay.
Yes.
And then they know that, of course.
That's right.
It's just in the moments that you lose the hope.
Yeah, that's right.
And that Kirrilie, you so beautifully explained that moment of catastrophizing, and often for a lot of parents straight after the idea. Well, actually, I was going to say straight after the identification of the difficulty. Now, not all kids have the difficulty identified, but I hear of reactions ranging from, oh, thank goodness, now we know it's something, to, oh no, this is it. This is the end. My child's never going to be what they want to be.
I hear more the first.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
I think the diagnosis provides great relief. But yes, there's still times where it worries. But I think it's not the diagnosis that causes the fear. It's the struggle that causes the fear.
Yeah.
But I want kids to learn those skills too of identifying decatastrophizing cognitions and thoughts, or I call them calm sentences.
Yeah.
So it's not just parents that need to do that, but we need to help kids who can manage their emotions as best they can, and that's obviously one strategy. But on that point, that is another one of those modifiable factors, that kids who have better skills at managing emotions are more likely to deal with their learning difficulties better than those that don't have any skills in doing that. So we can explicitly think about when we're feeling really down as adults or really overwhelmed or upset, what are the actual behaviours or steps that we take or things we say to ourselves or other people that help a little bit?
Yeah.
And how do we teach kids to do that?
Yeah.
Because we do a lot of hoping kids feel better or telling them to feel better, but we don't always actually talk them through the steps.
Give them the skills.
Yeah.
And so if I'm a parent, a bit lost, because you were saying often parents need support, it is very difficult to get an appointment with a psychologist.
Yes.
And not necessarily a guarantee of success.
Correct.
And so there would be a lot of people out there now who would be in a desperate situation.
Yes.
And thinking, where do I go?
Yes.
What do I do? Is there some online resource I can have a look at? Is there someone I can talk to you? Do you have any little tips for people, if they're wanting to try and learn what to do themselves or look for some strategies to try that they might not have tried?
And Kirrilie, if it's something you've developed, don't be shy about saying it. We're about helping people here.
Well, I think one of the first things I say to people is see a GP, because we do want to check on kids' safety. We do want to make sure that they have a health professional. If a parent is really worried, I really want a health professional looking at that family. So always go and talk to a GP.
Which isn't always easy at the moment. We've got a problem with that GPs as well. Yeah.
But usually you can get in to see a GP. And I know we've got more issues with gaps and we've got wait times, but I hope that most people in Australia have access to a GP. I'm sure you will hear on some social network that people will tell me I'm wrong. But if you have got access to a GP, please see that. Also, keep an eye out for helplines and safety lines. So there may be people listening to this who do have a critical safety issue in terms of self-harm or suicidality. It's really important to check Lifeline, go online. If you put in crisis supports, you'll find them, some of them. As far as other online resources, well, I mean, you have asked, I suppose, so I will let you know that we do have one.
Please.
It's called calmkidcentral.com, and it does have a range of modules for children 4 to 11 to help them with things like relaxing their bodies, how you help them with calm sentences, how you help them redirect attention, and a range of strategies like that. Otherwise, I would be looking at the self-help literature, really. And there are some great books that have been written out there. And if you go on Amazon and put in supporting or parenting children with challenges, and it might be learning difficulties or it might be other mental health difficulties, there are lots of psychologists who've written some great books. So you look at the reviews.
There are lots of good podcasts too on mental health, specifically targeting kids.
We
can put some links in the show notes.
Yeah. So Google is a good resource. It's just that it feels overwhelming at times because you just want someone to talk you through it because you just don't even have the brain space. But if you go, well, we can't get in to see a psychologist right now, but instead I'm going to spend that hour that I would have spent at an appointment getting a cup of tea, sitting down with a pen and paper on Google and just writing a few notes down, you will often find a few bits and pieces. The trouble is we have high expectations, so we're looking for the answer. So try not to look for the answer, but try and think about what might make things like 2% better. And you'll often find some.
What can you do in that moment of crisis? There's one we do with our kids, which we got from a psychologist. It's so simple, but it saved us so many times, which is, to try and get them into the present moment because they're freaking out, having a panic attack or whatever. And so one of the techniques we got told was tell us 3 things you can smell, 3 things you can see, 3 things you can taste, 3 things you can hear, and it forces them to focus on their senses right here and now. And by the time you get to the end of that list, they're magically usually calmed down and then sometimes, it'll escalate again after that. But there's that has been really helpful for us.
Great.
Do you have any little go-to strategies that you talk to people about, for those kind of
the big
crisis moments, where there's a kid that's,
just beside
a screaming
themselves.
mess on the floor or refusing to come out of their room because they're so anxious?
Well, the empathy one is the first one, and that doesn't have to be for hours. That can just be 30 seconds. It can be just one sentence or 2 sentences, and that can actually be quite magical when we stop trying to fix it and convince them to look at it differently and to convince them to calm down and just go, I can see you're feeling X and I'm sorry. I'm here with you. That can be magic. Another little strategy is around that redirection. So you've talked about redirection of attention to present moment, mindfulness, which can be great. But it can also be about redirection to let's talk about a different topic for 5 minutes, or let's go outside and, get on the trampoline, or let's have some food. So the reason this helps, and I think sometimes it can be useful to have the theory in the background, is if you think about the brain with where the attention is being directed. So if I'm freaking out about a assignment that I've got to do, then the parts of the brain that are all about danger, threat evaluation, they're of course highly active, right? We only have a certain amount of electrical and neurological energy in the brain, though. Like sometimes I talk to kids about this being a bit like petrol, right? We've only got a certain amount there. So if we make ourselves talk about or think about something else, then that energy is going to have to be redirected across to the front bit of the brain, away from the back bit. So that then means there's not as much left over for the bit that's a freaking out bit.
Yeah.
So distraction isn't just this abstract concept. Actually, something physical is happening in the brain. So that's why it can be helpful. We want to set this up with kids in advance, though, because if you just want to redirect and distract in the moment, what it feels like is invalidation, right? Yep. Whereas if you say in advance, you know how sometimes when we're doing your spelling words, can I say that?
Of course
still?
You can.
Spelling words?
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like it's not the phonetic kind of correct.
Spelling words are still okay. It's just how they're done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, when you get
really...
your
times tables.
That's right. You get really upset when we have to do that. And I don't blame you. I find it hard to do. I know you find it hard. But one thing I do know is that when I give myself a little break from thinking about something and go and do something else, what happens is another part of my brain starts working, and it helps the really worried part of my brain settle down a bit. So I would like permission from you, if that's okay, when you are feeling really worried, for us to do something else just for a few minutes. Now, you're not going to want to do that probably, because at the time you're going to go, but my assignment, and that's okay. Yep. So let's have an agreement that we won't do it for long, but we will do it for a little bit of time. And can you tell me, 3 things that we could talk about, or 3 little short activities that we could do in advance, and we'll have them here ready so that when it happens, we can go, remember, we've got 5 minutes to do on that. And then it doesn't feel like stop getting upset and go and do something else. It feels like it's a strategy we've agreed on together.
I love that.
Thank you very much.
You've agreed on it beforehand when things are calm and everyone's thinking clearly. So that you can just pull out the strategy and say, hey, let's do this.
I'm thinking of grown-up kids in my house that I could do that with. That is universally powerful.
Or with yourself.
With myself.
Yeah.
Well, no, you see, I apply all this to other people, Kirrilie, never myself. We all know I'm a different kettle of fish. Oh, wow.
Now, I did have a question. I mean, this is big, but, so I'm not expecting a complete answer, but there would be, and this comes from personal experience too, there would be parents out there whose kids have reached the point of school refusal, where, and it's understandable, where school is so hard for them that they just stop. And they say, you can't make me, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to school. Now, when I went through that with one of my kids, I found it extremely difficult to find any information anywhere about what to do as a parent. Education department website has nothing on it. And, I am an avid consumer of self-help podcasts and resources and so on, but I've never really seen school refusal, as such put into the spotlight and said, well, here's some strategies to think about. So do you see many kids or interact with kids who reach that school refusal point? Because sometimes I think it's good as a parent to know that this isn't just happening to you.
Yeah.
And this isn't, the parental guilt again. This isn't something you've done wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
But this happens.
It does.
Some kids get to the point where that's it. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't care what any threat or a consequence you can give me is not as bad,
Could not be that bad.
as me going to school.
Yeah.
Unfortunately is sadly quite common. And interesting, in the days of COVID, actually, I think we're seeing more school refusal. And I think it's because lots of kids have experienced the awesomeness of not being at school and do not want to go back.
Yes.
It's definitely a challenge that lots of families deal with. And in terms of where you get information about that, look, it is probably one of those things that really would benefit from a professional being involved. I mean, you can manage it in its early stages. One way to think about school refusal, which can be helpful, is to try and think about it mostly as an anxiety disorder, because that then gives you a bit of a framework to think about how do we help kids who are highly anxious about a particular situation or event. And I don't know where to start.
Yeah,
I know. I said it was big,
I've got a
It's very difficult.
hour and a half long professional development seminar that I give on school avoidance. So
schools, give Kirrilie a ring.
Well, it's a professional one actually, but
Schools don't give Kirrilie a ring.
what can I say that would be helpful? Do you have a specific question in there? I can tackle it if you want, or you might have something.
Well, I suppose the specific question is if you're going to go through this, there is a point where that first series of confrontations, whether they're confrontations or not, might happen, where the kid first says,
"No,
I'm not going to go to school." And I kind of think those moments are important as a parent. The first time this happens, what should my response be? Should it be saying, no, this is a non-negotiable. You do go to school and, you deal with it or whatever. Or, or should there be an allowance along the way for a mental health day where you say, okay, have a day off. Have a day off, calm down,
so
be less anxious? Or is that then a slippery slope where you're setting a precedent now that every time I feel bad, I have a day off?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely no blanket rule to say, no, you can never do it. I have to say, though, and this is probably my perspective because I see it go so wrong so often, and I probably don't see it where it doesn't go wrong. So you have to see this through my lens of my particular filter. But that is that it's risky because
to say stay home.
To say, yes, you can stay home.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that the young person completely understandably gets this massive reinforcement from that. So even at a completely unconscious level, what it says is staying home feels great and is good, and being at school is terrible and is bad. And that is so easily perpetuated over time. So ideally, no, but then that's really easy for me to sit here and say, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I say with full sympathy that sometimes it's an appropriate thing to do, but you've got to see it a bit like a ticking time bomb. And if it keeps happening, then you're going to have a massive issue. Now, that doesn't mean we then go, we've got to work our guts out to make school a better place for this child. That doesn't mean it's like you just got to kind of stick it and cope with torture. We keep on fighting to work out, can we make another 5% difference here or 1% difference here? And sometimes it's like smaller, like, you're going to school, but I'm going to pick you up at lunchtime or recess time even. Like, I would rather a parent pick up a child at lunchtime every day for a while than go, well, you just don't have to go.
Yeah. Yes, ticking time bomb. I often use the term very slippery slope. And that's so true. When kids get out of the habit of being at school, that fear about going back just gets bigger and bigger, I find, for them. So I think that's really really clever guidance around, even if it's till recess time, you just bring the light at the end of the tunnel closer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, there will be some families who listen to this who probably say, it was the best thing we ever did.
Yeah.
It increased their mental health.
Yeah.
We got into, open access maybe or alternative schooling or homeschooling, and it was the best thing I've ever done for my child.
Because it got us a level of support we otherwise couldn't have accessed.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Lots of ways it can be good. So I'm certainly not saying that it for every child is a disaster. But I would say I've seen plenty of times it has been a disaster.
Yeah.
Is that too strong? I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
Because school provides the social connection, the routine, the sense of mastery over difficult things. So for a lot of kids, if you take school away, not only do you take social stuff away, you take away this idea that you can cope in tough environments.
Yeah.
So that's risky. So this is where we have to be really careful about and really, considered about what does this actually mean.
Is it worth having that sort of conversation up front with a kid?
To the child?
Yeah. Like, is it worth, I suppose it depends on the age of the kid and so on.
It does.
Doesn't
And
it?
kids don't care because a lot of the time, because the anxiety is so strong.
Yeah.
Like what you said, like that they'll do anything. I've seen kids vomiting, screaming, sobbing at the school gates.
Yes.
Yeah.
And parents understandably go, I can't. I'm torturing my child.
Yeah.
So for me to have a conversation with them about, it's really good for your long-term mental health, that child does not care.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're desperate.
Yeah. So if parents believe it is the right thing, I know it is the right thing for my child to be at school. Unfortunately, it's on them, not the child, to make it happen.
Yeah.
They might be an adolescent. The same rules apply. The adolescent, obviously, there's a lot more autonomy and a whole lot of change. But the young person, what is the same is the young person will still not want to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They'll intellectually want to go.
Yes, I've seen this. Yeah, I know I should be going, but I just can't get there.
Yeah. And even not going increases anxiety.
Yes, that's right.
Because I'm not there.
Yes.
And I know I'm missing out.
Yes.
But it's too hard to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the anxiety spirals.
Yes.
Yes.
And
Even when they're not there.
And you really need support when this is happening. I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about this in a very superficial way.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
there's a lot
Yes.
of
There's more
nuance
to
to
it.
this.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. It's never just a simple answer, is it?
no.
I had one last question. I know we've been picking your brain a lot. Do you think that kids living with a learning difficulty, do you think it makes them a little more susceptible to other mental health issues? Because it takes so much energy. A typical school day could be quite exhausting for a kid who, struggles with maths or reading. Do you think it means they have a little less in the tank? A little less resilience overall. So when those inevitable things happen in life that are nothing to do with learning difficulty, they're not quite, got enough fuel in the tank to cope with it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the research backs that up, and I think all of us who work with those kids or parent them can see it, that they will find other things harder because they're exhausted mentally or otherwise. And the trouble is that depending on their age and emotional development, they're not so great at expressing that constructively. They don't say, I'm feeling a bit blue because of blah, blah, or I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed or I'm really tired. They say, I hate you and you're an idiot and I'm going to just tip this chair over.
Yeah.
So, and then they get more negative feedback from adults around them. They often get less warmth and less understanding because they're not so great at showing their vulnerability. They're going to act out.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, this is where we started, I suppose, that there is a higher likelihood that they will struggle. But as you pointed out, it's not inevitable. And if we can manage, if we can try and manage social supports and peer connection and a sense of self-concept and be empathic as parents and get them as much appropriate educational support and fight for them, then yes, they might have some extra difficulties, but it doesn't have to be life determining.
And I hear you saying give them more things that they can enjoy and be good at and be fun with. Like put aside time to have a social life, to do things that they like, so when you get home from school, there's something to look forward to doing rather than, now I've got another grinding night of homework. And so then they get no respite, do they?
Yes, as much as possible. And that's not easy for families either because they're like, well, where do we find the time and money to do all of that? But as much as we can,
I've just got 3 calm and confident sentences here, Kirrilie, from this wonderful book, When Life Sucks for Kids. And I do like the when because it's not if, it's when.
Yeah.
But here we go. Calm and confident sentence number 1, I'm not alone. Number 2, I can get smarter and smarter the more I work my brain. And number 3, I have lots of strengths. I thought that's probably a nice way to conclude. Kirrilie, thank you so much. It's just, I did a lot of listening and a lot of reflecting, and I've learned a lot. And I'm sure that parents who've listened have also learned a lot. So, Kirrilie, you have a gift with what you do. Thank you for sharing that with us and with our listeners.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of Discastia.
Episode 10.
Yeah, we'll be putting the show notes up on our website as usual. Anything that we've mentioned, we'll try and add there. You can subscribe to us on our website so that you get notified when we have new episodes. And you'll find links there to Bill's social media profile, my profile. So feel free to reach out. We'd love to have a discussion. And thanks again for joining us, everyone.